What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's transfer tips for Game Week 5. So I'm going to go through some of the popular players people are looking to bring in or out of their squad and talk about whether they are good moves or not. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and let's get into it. So let's start with Kevin Schade, because this is a player's name that you're going to be hearing a lot more often over the next couple of game weeks after the information that we got about Visser yesterday. So for anyone that hasn't seen it, Visser got an injury against Man City in Game Week 4, and Brentford have confirmed that he's going to miss a couple of months. So they need someone else to play number 9 because he's injured. Thiago, who they bought in the summer, is also out long term. And of course, they've sold Tony as well. And the most likely player to come in to fulfill that role will be Schade at 5.4 million, who's also listed as a midfielder. So you might have a 5.4 million midfielder that's going to play number 9. Now, against Spurs away in Game Week 5, they'll probably play with 2 up top because they'll be in their back 3 formation. So it'll be Schade and Mbeumo. But in the easier fixtures, like West Ham at home in 6, Wolves at home in 7, Ipswich at home in 9, it'll be back to that 4-3-3. And Mbeumo could play as the number 9, but I think it's more likely he stays off the right. And Schade is just the most likely to come in and play. And then you'll probably have like Lewis Potter on the left. So Visser's injury definitely weakens Brentford overall. But for FPL, it opens up a couple of options. I think with Lewis Potter, he's listed at, he's a midfielder, of course, but he's actually a little bit cheaper at 5 million. The only issue is if they play with a back 3, he's probably going to play as a wing back, so wouldn't be necessarily as attacking. And I just think for an extra 0.4 million, you probably buy the guy that is going to play number 9. Now, this doesn't mean that Schade is all of a sudden essential or anything like that, so you don't need to panic. But you can see how much of a differential he is. 0.1% ownership overall. He's had 462 transfers in this week. That's unlikely to get much bigger because Spurs away, it's not a terrible fixture, but it's not an amazing one either. But from Game Week 6 onwards, especially if you're looking to wildcard, Schade is a player that you should be considering. Now, he's not the only player around that price. We're going to talk about Smith Rowe later. Obviously, Rodgers is a little bit cheaper. You've got McNeil, who's doing really well at the moment, playing number 10 for Everton. He's also 5.4. He's dropped from 5.5. So it doesn't mean that Schade is now the obvious one to go to, but as a massive differential that he's unlikely to suddenly be like 20% owned or anything like that. With the fixtures that Brentford have got coming up, I quite like that. Now, you could look at it and say, well, they're going to be weak. No Tony, Thiago's injured, Visser's out as well. It's not great, and I would agree. But I think the price and the position that Schade can play probably trumps all that, and his minutes definitely go up. In terms of what we should expect from him, it's hard to know. He's still quite young. We haven't seen him play regular minutes for Brentford really at all. But I just think the price and the fixtures and the position he's probably going to play is worth taking that punt. So you don't have to rush out and buy him, but definitely one to keep an eye on. He should play against Spurs regardless. It'll just probably be a different formation like against City. But from 6 onwards, they'll probably be back to that back 4. And I think he'll play number 9. Let's talk about Luis Díaz next. Still quite popular despite blanking against Nottingham Forest at home in Game Week 4. Just over 160,000 transfers in ahead of Game Week 5. And I think it makes a lot of sense when you look at total points on the FPL page. So for midfielders, 3 of the top 4 highest scoring players all cost 10 million or above. So Salah, Saka and Palmer, as you'd expect. In second place, it's Luis Díaz. 35 points, only 8 behind Salah. And at 7.7 million, that looks pretty good. The thing that would worry me is the minutes. Now, he might have played just over 60 against Forest because it was after the international break. He does a lot of travelling and stuff like that. But against Man United in Game Week 3, ahead of the international break, it was 65. He just had a week off. 71 against Brentford. I don't think that's massively encouraging going forward, knowing that Liverpool have other players that can play in his position. Now, I think he'll continue to start, and he absolutely could get enough points in those minutes, as we've seen, right? 14 against Brentford Game Week 2, 15 against Man United Game Week 3. He hit the post against Forest as well. So I still like him, but I think if you're going to get him, this has to be the week. The longer you delay it, the worse this is going to look. Because after Bournemouth at home in 5, it's Wolves away in 6, Palace away in 7, then Chelsea at home in 8 and Arsenal away in 9. Now, Chelsea at home might not be that bad. 2 away games against Wolves and Palace aren't the end of the world, but it's not a fixture run that you would necessarily look to target. Now, for his price, he probably will continue to do pretty well. And once you come below 8 million, there's not a huge amount of standout players. Like Bowen and Gordon absolutely nailed on, which is nice. But they're not setting the world alight in terms of FPL points. So I can still see reason that people are going for Díaz. But personally, I'd still rather have Eze, despite the fact that he's only returned once so far this season. In Burma also looks really good from game week 6 onwards. A lot of people are still going to have at least one of Salah or Saka. Midfield spots are quite... There's not a huge amount where you can just go with whoever you want. And at some point, you've probably got to have a cheap player in there as well. So I just don't really know where Luis Díaz fits in moving forward. And obviously, that's personal preference, right? And I'm often wrong. So you can absolutely go against that. But I think with Champions League coming up, it would just put me off him even more. So I don't hate bringing him in this week because I think Bournemouth at home is decent. Wolves away is not bad whatsoever. And Palace is struggling to keep clean sheets as well. So the next 3 look okay. But if he keeps getting subbed off early, I don't think that's a great thing moving forward. And at some point, maybe he gets benched. Maybe Gakpo goes and plays left wing from the start of a game for 60 minutes. Then you only get 30 minutes from Díaz at the end of a game. And look, you could say that he could score off the bench. Of course he could. But that's not what you want in FPL. That's the kind of thing people say until it happens. And then they get frustrated that their player's not starting. And if that's you, I just wouldn't buy him. So I think he'll probably do well this week. But he might have to do well quickly in like 60 minutes. And that is not ideal for FPL. So personally, I wouldn't be looking to bring him in anymore. I think anyone that went for him for game week 1, happy days. I'm not saying the boat's been missed, but it is starting to get to that stage, in my opinion. You're not bringing him in this week. I think you've got to ignore him. Maybe that's why people are going for him this week. But I'd definitely wait until Champions League has happened to see how Liverpool line up, first of all, but also just in case of injuries and stuff like that. So nearly 200,000 transfers out for João Pedro ahead of game week 5, and I get the frustration. Brighton's best fixture of the first 8 game weeks was in game week 4 against Ipswich at home, and João Pedro wasn't even in the squad, which is not ideal, unless you got Smith off the bench like me or Gabriel like some people, but generally not great for him to miss a fixture like that. And also a bit worryingly, Brighton didn't score any goals in that game. And on paper, that looks like a plum fixture. And now they've got Forest at home, who look good defensively. And those underlying numbers from last year are starting to look like it wasn't an anomaly. And they're now converting that into not conceding a huge amount of goals this year and getting a clean sheet away to Liverpool, which is really impressive. So it wouldn't put me off playing João Pedro or any Brighton attacker against Forest, but it doesn't look as good as it did maybe a couple of game weeks ago, right? So if you can, hold on until you get news from Hertzler about whether or not he's back. I will say this, though. He does seem to pick up quite a few knocks. If you look at last year, I think someone said to me, it might have been Luke, who I've had on the channel a couple of times, that when João Pedro starts, he often plays like 80, 85 minutes plus. And you can see that this year, right? 81 in game week 1, 90, 90. So the minutes are good when he starts, but he only actually started 19 times last year. Now, that could partially be because of De Zerbi's, want to rotate players, but it is a little bit worrying about how often João Pedro is just not available. So for me, he was almost looking like a player I would just hold on to, not indefinitely, but for a while, because he only cost me 5.5. He's such good value potentially. But if he is going to miss Forest and then he's a slight doubt going into Chelsea, or we're not completely sure, I don't think he is a lock on wildcard or anything like that. I think I'd prefer to target someone with better fixtures. And there's a lot of good cheap forwards at the moment. So Jamie Vardy, for example, people are considering. Calvert-Lewin I've spoken about. Chris Wood from game week 6 has got good fixtures. Is there any need to have a player with Chelsea away, Spurs at home, Newcastle away between game week 6 and 8? Probably not. And Wolves at home in 9 is good. Then you've got Liverpool away in 10. Now, I always come back to the fact that even if you're buying him now, he's only 5.7. He's on penalties and he's playing in a good attacking team, although they have just blanked to Ipswich. So there is part of me that thinks you could just keep hold of him and rotate him in and out of your squad as like an 8th attacker. But I think if I was wildcarding in 6, which I probably am going to do, I'm not sure I'm going to go with him. So we need to, for this week, I still think it's fine to play him as long as he's available. So you can hold on and wait for news. But if you are going to get rid of him or he's not available, I think as a long-term pick, I'd go Calvert-Lewin, but for this week only, probably Jamie Vardy. So as I've just mentioned him, let's talk about Jamie Vardy next, who had another price rise last night. So he started at 5.5, he went up to 5.6, and then last night he went to 5.7. If you want to check which players are likely to change in price, by the way, Fantasy Football Hub have a completely free price change page. I'll leave a link in the description below. Essentially, and it's difficult to be 100% accurate about this stuff, but when a player gets to 100% and in the blue, or close to 100%, they're likely to rise pretty soon. And then when a player gets to minus 100% and in the red, they're likely to drop in price soon. So you can see Bruno Fernandes is minus 99%. He's been very close to a price drop for a little while now. It's almost certainly going to happen ahead of game week 5. So if you had Fernandes and you wanted to sell him, you could consider doing that before you lose any team value. But be absolutely sure that that's the move you want to make. If you're not, I'd take the price drop on the chin. Same with any player. And then just wait until you've got a bit more information. Likewise, if there's a player that you're thinking about buying or selling, you want to see where they're at, you can actually just search their name at the top. So Isak, for example, he's dropped from 8.5 to 8.4. He's only at minus 28%. So there's no need to worry about him right now. I'd much rather get more information over midweek Champions League games and stuff like that before I worry about selling him. But like I said, completely free, links in the description. Back to Jamie Vardy. I really like him as an option, right? And it does help that he's just scored another goal. So I think that's 2 for the season for him now. 1 against Palace, 1 against Spurs. So in game week 4 and game week 1. It's a little bit worrying that against Fulham in 2 and Villa in 3, he put up 0 XG. But against Spurs, it was 0.8. He scored the goal and had another really good chance. And against Palace, it was 0.64. So he is still getting chances, and he played 90 minutes in both of the last 2 games as well. So that's pretty encouraging. They do have Edouard now, so he could get minutes as well. But I think while Vardy is fit, he's just going to keep playing. And with a week between games and not many midweek matches and stuff like that for Leicester, as long as he's fine, he's probably going to keep getting the minutes. And he's on penalties as well. And the fixtures that Leicester have coming up are just really good. Arsenal away in 6 is not great. But if you've got an 8th attacker that you could play instead, you could always bench Vardy that week. Then you've got Everton at home in 5, who keep conceding goals. It's like 6 in the last 2 games. Bournemouth at home in 7, Southampton away in 8, Forest at home in 9, and Ipswich away in 10. So he's definitely got the fixtures. The only concern that I have is fitness. Because you can be as fit as you like, but age eventually catches up to you. And Jamie Vardy is obviously getting a bit older now, right? He can still clearly do it in the Premier League, as we've seen. But that's the only worry I have. Will that fitness hold up over these, the next 5-6 game weeks? Because it's not the kind of player you want to bring in and have to mess about with taking back out again. But I think he's proved it so far. Leicester aren't going to have a bunch of midweek games like Champions League and stuff like that to contend with. So I suspect he'll probably be fine. And I think for 5.7, that's a really nice price. I probably wouldn't bring him in ahead of someone like Calvert-Lewin, because I think if you look at the fixtures for Everton, you don't have that Arsenal away game in there. So they've got Leicester at home this week. Then it's Palace at home, Newcastle at home, Ipswich away, Fulham at home, Southampton away. It's just a really good fixture run for Everton right up until... even Man United away is probably not terrible. But Liverpool at home and Arsenal away in 15 and 16. But that's ages away. So I do prefer Calvert-Lewin. But as a 1-week punt going for the guy at home, I think Jamie Vardy is probably the one that I would bring in. He's had 146,000 transfers in so far. That's going to continue to rise. I think he's a good option. I don't know. You look at the XG per 90, it's 0.39, which is decent enough. And he's getting the minutes as well. There's something that tells me those minutes won't continue at 90, and Edouard might play a bit of a part. But I also think for Leicester, they needed a bit of competition. They needed more depth in their squad. I don't think it's a case that Edouard's been brought in to play ahead of Jamie Vardy. But maybe I'm wrong about that, but I just don't feel like that's the case. So, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I think Jamie Vardy's a pretty good option as long as he stays fit. And right now, that's exactly what he's doing. So just one other quick thing on Jamie Vardy and his fitness. I think it was ahead of game week 1 against Spurs at home where there were some doubts around whether or not he would start. Steve Cooper said he had a bit of an issue and he wasn't sure. Now, to be fair, that could just be Steve Cooper things. He doesn't tend to give away too much team news. But it looked like there was a genuine concern there. And Vardy played anyway. And he does seem like that kind of player that even if he's got a bit of a knock, he'll try and get himself through the game. So although I do think that age catches up to everyone and eventually he'll have to slow down, it doesn't look like that's happening right now. Maybe that will over the course of the season. We'll have to wait until later on this year. But he also seems like if he does have a bit of a knock, he'll just play anyway. I guess with Edouard there, they might not take the risk anymore. But I just think overall, things look quite good for his minutes in the short term, and the fixtures are just great. So if you want to take that punt, I'm really not against it at all. Let's talk about Erling Haaland next. I think he scored about 50 goals or something so far this season. Another 165,000 transfers in. He's already 15.2 million, and he's close to another price rise as well, which will of course take him to 15.3. Now, what is there to talk about here, really? The guy is just great. You all know that. You don't need me to tell you. Here's what I want to say. If you've got a team with no Haaland, it's probably been quite painful. Although there's probably a lot of non-Haaland owners out there that are still ahead of me, right? I'm sure there's plenty of you out there. But in general, I think it has been quite painful. But I think there is reason in Game Week 5 to double down on not owning him. Because if he's ever not going to do well, it's in a fixture like Arsenal at home. The best defence in the league, I would say. Man City very good as well, but Arsenal definitely number one. Now, can Haaland go and score another 2 or 3 goals against Arsenal? Yes. Is that likely to happen? I would say probably not. And a lot of people that own just Haaland, and no Salah, like me, are thinking about bringing Salah in purely for captaincy. Not because we think Haaland is definitely going to blank, but because the chances of getting a big score are a lot lower than they would be in any other fixture. And I think Arsenal and maybe Liverpool are the only 2 games where I'd look elsewhere for captaincy with Haaland. It might be that, Game Week 6 when Saka's got Southampton at home and Haaland's got Newcastle away, I might back against him again, but I'd be less sure about doing that. In Game Week 5, I think I probably will. So if you haven't got him, you could double down and just delay it a little bit further. I'm not saying forever. You could pick him up in Game Week 6 against Newcastle away or Fulham at home in Game Week 7. But I just don't think you necessarily need him this week. Now, of course, if you're wildcarding or you're just sick of the sight of him and you just need him in your team, you should do that, right? Because keeping your sanity is a big part of FPL, and sometimes just getting players in like that helps with it. But I think you could go against it in Game Week 5. And this is not me as a Haaland owner hoping that less people bring him in. I just think it's a tough fixture, which is probably why I'll bring Salah in. And we saw against Spurs how many chances there were in that game for Spurs. Hardly any. And Man City are better. They'll probably make it a much more tougher for Arsenal than Spurs did. But I don't think massively. And we saw Arsenal away to City last year. It was a really cagey game, and I think it'll be exactly the same. So, absolutely fine if you want to bring in Haaland. Of course it is. But I think if you're ever not going to do it, this is the week. And plan for 6 or 7 instead, and just build up another transfer if you can get through the weekend without Haaland, right? If you can keep your sanity, then I would say don't buy him. For everyone else, just probably bring him in now rather than wait till 6 or 7. So likewise, I can't see too many reasons to bring in Gabriel this week when he's about to play, guess who? Erling Haaland, right? Man City away, absolutely terrible fixture on paper. And I know he's just got a 15-pointer against Spurs, which looks great. It's going to be more difficult to do that in Game Week 5. Now, of course, if the 70,000 transfers in for Gabriel are mostly wildcards, I get it, because they've got Leicester at home in 6, Southampton at home in 7, Bournemouth away in 8. And generally, I think that game against Spurs was just a nice reminder that Arsenal are brilliant, and you never have to worry about playing their defenders in any game. And long term, it probably is worth just getting one in and not worrying about transferring them out ever unless they lose their place or get injured. But I'd still question whether bringing them in for Man City away is the time to do it. So if you're wildcarding, fair enough. You get them in ready for Game Week 6. For everyone else, you can just hold off on the transfer. So Emil Smith-Rowe had another price rise this week. That means he's gone from 5.5 at the start of the season to 5.7 million. He's had 2 attacking returns so far, a goal in Game Week 2 and assist in Game Week 4. He started every match, just over 130,000 transfers in so far this week. He looks like a decent pick for the price, and the underlying numbers are good too. So 0.29 expected goals per 90, 0.23 expected assists. That is decent. You do need to put some context around those numbers though, and that is he's very rarely going to get to 90 minutes. So far 63, 68, 71, 72, and around the 70-minute mark is probably where I'd expect him to be subbed off quite often moving forward, because Fulham do have other options, and Marco Silva has said in pre-season that he needs to build up that fitness because it's been a long time since he's played regularly. So we should expect the early subs to continue to happen, but he's only 5.7 million. I think he pretty much is nailed to start. So I like him, and I own him right now. I may or may not play him in Game Week 5. I'll save that discussion for the team selection video, but I think he's fine this week. Newcastle at home is not a terrible fixture, but I'm in 2 minds about whether or not I think he's a good transfer in this week. Because you've got Forest away in 6 and City away in 7. 2 pretty difficult fixtures as an attacker. Villa at home, Everton away and Brentford at home between Game Weeks 8 and 10 is not bad. So 4 of the next 6 are fine, but 2 of the tough ones are in the next 3 game weeks. So as a short-term option, I'm not sure he's that good. And I own him right now, and I think if you're not looking to wildcard or you've already used it, Smith Rowe's not a bad long-term option because the fixtures don't get tricky until kind of game week 13 onwards. We got Spurs away, Brighton at home, Arsenal at home, Liverpool away. But at the same time, I've looked at wildcard 6 drafts, and at no point have I considered having Emil Smith Rowe. I've always looked like a Schade or a McNeil or just keeping Rodgers, someone like that instead, because of the fixtures that Fulham have in 6 and 7 in particular. So I think overall my opinion is still that Smith Rowe is a pretty good option. He may not keep up those numbers. They might come down slightly, but he's always going to start and be getting into attacking position, so I like him. I just don't know if this is the right time to bring him in. Could you go for a cheap midfielder around that price with slightly better fixtures? If you just want to put him in and forget about him and you're just going to keep him the whole way through, I think that's fine. But I do think if you're planning a wild card in like 6, 7, 8 or something like that, there's players with better fixtures in the short term, like McNeil, who I've just mentioned, maybe even like Schade as well, that you could go for and then look at Smith Rowe later. So he's fine. I just don't like game week 6 or 7 all that much. So someone on my stream on Sunday said, why is no one talking about Aina and Nottingham Forest? So here we are talking about him, just over 100,000 transfers in after a clean sheet against Liverpool in game week 4. And the nice thing is he's already dropped in price this season. So he's only 4.4 million. He's a differential at 3% ownership as well. And while I don't think there's a rush to get Nottingham Forest defenders because it's Brighton away this week, the home games they've got coming up are decent. So Fulham at home in 6, Palace at home in 8, and West Ham at home in 10. Even Leicester away in 9 is not all that bad. I will say, if you're looking to bring in a cheap defender that you want to play every week, I'm not sure this is the time to get a Forest one, because Brighton away in 5, like I mentioned, then Chelsea away in 7. But as a rotation option, I think he looks pretty good. And if you look at the defenders so far for total points, he's sat on 20, same as Dalot, Van Dijk, and Ben White. Even Trent Alexander-Arnold is only 1 point ahead. So I get why there's heavy investment in Forest defence. In terms of how nailed he is, I saw a few Forest fans basically saying when Moreno came in that Aina will play left back with Nico Williams, and then when Moreno comes in to play left back, Aina will move to right back, and that's exactly what happened. Now, would a Nottingham Forest fan tell you that Aina is like 100% nailed? I'm not sure, but I think it'd be like high 90%, and he's played 90 minutes in each of the last 3 games. And I think we should expect him to be in that 11 way more often than not. And he's definitely someone that I'm going to look at on wildcard 6. Because the underlying numbers for their defence last year were good, but they did concede quite a few goals. Those numbers have continued to be decent this year. And they've only conceded 2 goals so far. So the clean sheet against Liverpool, clean sheet against Southampton, 1 goal conceded against Wolves, 1 against Bournemouth. That is it. And the underlying numbers are great. 0.55 expected goals conceded versus Bournemouth, 0.14 against Southampton, 0.74 against Wolves, and the most impressive, keeping Liverpool to under 1xG at Anfield. Now, do I think Forest are now an elite defence and as good as like Arsenal, Man City? Of course not. But for their price, they're potential bargains. So I like Aina. If you want to go maybe a bit safer with your pick, then Milenkovic, probably a threat from set pieces, I would say, at 4.5, and Murillo at 4.5 as well. They both look absolutely nailed, but Aina seems to be in that team no matter what. And if he wants to bring Nico Williams in, I wouldn't be completely surprised if Aina moves back to left back and Moreno comes out of the team. But Moreno was great against Liverpool. He was really good up against Mo Salah, and he's also 4.4. I think between the two, based on what we've seen previously, like at Aston Villa and stuff like that, Moreno is likely to be the more attacking defender. But I think Aina's minutes are probably slightly better, so that's why I'd probably go for him. Or if you want to play it mega safe, you just pay an extra 0.1 and get one of the centre-backs. Just on Aina's stats so far this season from an attacking sense, 0.01 expected goals per 90, 0.06 expected assists. Not amazing, but if I look at the numbers from last year, I think they were a little bit better. So on the Opta Stats tool on Hub, I can just go to last season pretty quickly. Actually, it wasn't that much better, to be honest. 0.05 expected assists, 0.02 expected goals. Was he playing? No, he wasn't there the season before that. So I don't think he's massively attacking or anything like that. Maybe Forest fans can leave a comment below and let me know if I've got that wrong. But I do think he's probably going to play. Maybe Milenkovic is better for 0.1. Either way, the home games they've got coming up, a Forest defender looks good. You don't need to rush in and buy him this week. So it feels like I talk about Josko Gvardiol most weeks, and obviously after the benching in game week 4 against Brentford, people are really frustrated with him, and he's been sold by just over 130,000 FPL managers. And I think for 6 million, that probably makes sense, especially with Arsenal at home and Newcastle away next 2 game weeks. It's going to be difficult to get a clean sheet. Interestingly, I'm playing Champions League Fantasy this year, and I asked Luke, who's been on the channel a couple of times so far this season, who he thinks is the most nailed-on Man City defender moving forward, bearing in mind that it's difficult to ever nail down what the 11 is going to be week to week. And he said Gvardiol. He doesn't see, presumably, Rico Lewis continuing to play left-back. Ake's also out for a while. And even when Ake comes back, he thinks that he's more likely to play as one of the centre-backs rather than the left-back. So Gvardiol's minutes might be pretty good moving forward, but I appreciate that so far this season it's been quite brutal owning him. Like, it's not been a complete disaster, but it's not been great either. So if I just bring out Gvardiol here, then he got the clean sheet against Chelsea in game week 1, and then it has been like 3 blanks in a row: Ipswich, West Ham, Brentford. It's not great. I wouldn't sit here and argue that anyone should keep him, but I do think longer term, if he's going to keep his place and Ake's out for a while, City do have some pretty good fixtures coming up. Fulham at home in 7, Wolves away in 8, Southampton at home in 9, Bournemouth away in 10 is not a bad run. But I think it's really difficult to make an argument for him when you can get the likes of Robertson for the same price, who looks pretty much nailed on. And Liverpool defence has been pretty decent. I know they just conceded to Forest, but first 3 games they were good. And obviously Gabriel and Saliba as well. In an Arsenal defence where you know they're going to continue to start, and it's like the best defence in the league, and they've got Leicester and Southampton coming up. So I am making no argument to keep Gvardiol, but I find it interesting that Luke is still fairly convinced. And look, I might have misquoted him slightly, right? So don't put it all on Luke, put it on me. But he still thinks that Gvardiol is probably the most nailed out of the City defenders going forward. So make of that what you will. But if you want to sell him this week, I get it. There's probably not a clean sheet against Arsenal. It's going to be difficult. And even Newcastle away, I don't really see it either. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button as well. Rate 5 stars if you listen on podcast. If you want to use any of the tools over on Fantasy Football Hub, there's 50% off at the moment if you sign up yearly, or you can try it out monthly as well, just to give it a go and see how you feel. But stuff like price changes is completely free. All the links you need are in the description below. Otherwise, I'll catch you tomorrow for the game week preview.